thing to you, child, I must tell, gay this farewell poem, my singings end, these last waves of silver throb and sweat. That's just terrible. Maybe the German's better, I don't know. But you get the idea. It's funny. Well, Karl Marx looked Jewish in the classical sense, and he was short. Engels was tall and skinny and looked Teutonic. I don't know what you would say. I don't know what you would say. But so they were thick and thin, almost. Thick and thin. Like Oliver Hardy and I mean, in any case, let me get back to here. So they're friends for 40 years, and in fact, Engels, his father was in manufacturing, and Engels was supposed to become a manufacturer as well, and wealthy. Marx was always poor until pretty much close to the very end of his life, when his books started making him money. He actually wrote for the New York Times, sold articles to the New York Times. He was a reporter for the New York Times for a while. So there were revolutions in 1848. They didn't do well, but it caused an awful lot of not only political issues, but economic issues and so on. And so he ended up being kicked out of France as well, even though he was never actually actively involved in any of the revolutions. He was associated with them because of his writings. And so he ended up going to England and basically ended up living there the rest of his life. And he was supported financially by Engels. And he famously worked in the British Museum in the reading room, which up until recently was kept the way it was so that you could actually see the spot where you usually sat. But they've remodeled the reading room, and so that's gone now. But if you go to London, one of the things you can see, I think we'll see it here. It's one of the, that's his birthplace in Trier, which is in Germany. Jenny, good night. Is a young student. University of Jena. Engels. So there's Marx with his daughters and Engels. This is Marx, it's Engels. And I guess Jenny's not in that picture. Maybe she was dead already. London. England puts these little blue circles on important houses so that you know, hey, Karl Marx lived here. He's older. It's Capital. Look, there's so that's yeah, that's funny. He named all three of his daughters Jenny. in honor of Jenny. Okay, that's the memorial there, where folks come and actually have communist rallies and honor Karl Marx in London. It was interesting that once he came to London and started writing, the British could care less. They weren't worried at all. And it is kind of interesting that when you look at the history of the Communist Party and revolutions and so on, that the situation was really ripe in England. In fact, England was the place where the Industrial Revolution really took off because of the inventions that so many people made all over. It wasn't just one town, it was lots of towns. Manchester, for example, had so many factories making cloth. That's why Engels went there, because his father's partners were there in Manchester making cloth and so on. And so the situation was clear that these kinds of factories are going to make some people really wealthy, but all the workers are impoverished. Mines especially are another example of that, where the people are working in the mines, sometimes even their whole families are down in the mine. The father's the one digging the coal out, and the wife is the one helping move it, and the children are there with the lights, trying to, so the whole family's down there all day, more than a normal work day today, right? And they just come out, and they're ill from those conditions. They can't even stand up in that place. You can take tours of those places. They have. There are tours of coal mines in Pennsylvania that I've been on. And you can buy the little chocolate, the candies, hard. Candies that are made to look like little coal that come with little hammers. It's cute. But, there's Hegel and Feuerbach. And I guess that's Marx and Engels in Shanghai. Of course, Shanghai. Why would it be in Shanghai? Because they're communists, right? And so they think of Marx and Engels as not only the authors of the Communist Manifesto, which they were hired to do by the Communist Party. They weren't actually members of the party. The Communist Party hired them to write. It's kind of interesting too. Workers Unite. I don't know what this is. Looks like Arabic, I'm guessing. Oh, maybe not. No, that's Arabic. I only know Aleph. So, get the idea. So, Das Kapital literally means capital. In German, you have the in front of it, so it's Das Kapital. And the concept of capital, of course, is still very important, and main influences on Marx, especially in Paris, were the contemporary economists of the time. We mostly think of Marx as an economist, not just a philosopher, but his concern is how is the economy, the material through which Hegel's Geist transforms this dialectical society, right? So if we're going to understand this concrete Geist, what we have to understand is the physical things that go on. So For Marx, it's class, social classes, and social classes are the dialectical conflict that cause the different social change that takes place. So you've got the capitalists, bourgeoisie, but for him, the proletariat, the workers, are the main physical body of people that he sees as this dominant spirit that has to take its place and throw out the capitalists that are using and abusing them for profit. And the main thing that happens to the workers is that they become alienation from their own lives, actually. Because what happens is they're being paid to make something. And even for Karl Marx, the people that he was familiar with were craftsmen who were making something and being paid for it. Today we think of factory workers as, all working on the line, just doing the same repetitious job, etc. And you think, well, that's really alienating because you eventually, don't have any of yourself in your work. You almost hate it. It's just so repetitious, and you don't feel like you're skilled or making something special. Instead, you're just putting this piece here, and then the next machine comes and you put this piece here, and the next machine comes and you put this piece here. You hardly get any break or anything, and it's just so repetitious, mind-blowing, basically, right? So when we think of this alienation today, we think of that kind of situation, but that wasn't the case for Marx. He was certainly aware of things in Manchester where people were in factories and came out of work, and the mines, of course. He was never in the mines. I don't think he was ever in the factories. But as he came out of the library, he was aware of all these people going through all this and wrote about them. And you end up with his sense that you're alienated from everything that you do when you're paid for it. So the problem is being paid to produce something, because it, in a sense, means that your value is the money. And the money is not a real thing, it's an abstraction. So if I'm doing this right, you'll notice that the abstraction that Feuerbach claimed the concept of God was, and that alienates us from our concept of the good and the divine and how wonderful humans are. God alienates us from that. Well, being paid for your work alienates you from your work, because the money becomes that godlike abstraction that we're working for. We're working for the money. And the money is, in a sense, worthless for us. So we're alienated by that. I'm not sure I buy the argument, so I'm not sure I'm making it, in a good way. But this is, in a sense, his heart of the matter, that the proletariat, we often say the proles, and that, it's even Russian, proletariat, Всех стран соединяйтесь, workers of the world unite, basically, right? But we need to unite and get rid of the abstraction of capital, the abstraction of money, and go back to kind of a community where everyone, does things for one another. The farmer grows foods, and the other farmer grows eggs, chickens. Everybody shares. Comes to the market and trades eggs for clothes and stuff. So you don't have money, now you have the stuff itself, right? Well, if we think today, play this, probably the whole thing. Is that all right? Uh-oh, you're not gonna have sound. We do have sound.
One of the interesting lessons coming from this historical evidence is indeed that in the long run there is a tendency. Okay, so it's very nice to be here tonight. So I've been working on the history of income and wealth distribution for the past 15 years, and one of the interesting lessons coming from